Good morning, everyone. We're going to be starting the meeting shortly. People are still entering, but it is 7:32, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. Before we start the meeting, I just want to let everybody know that the discussion portion of the panel will be by using chat box only. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat box. So we're going to start the meeting with the land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the town of Shelburne resides within the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Chippewa, and the people of the Three Fire Confederacy. These traditional territories upon which we live, work, play, and learn are steeped in rich Indigenous history and traditions. It is with this statement that we declare to honor and respect the past and present connections of Indigenous peoples with this land, its waterways, and resources. We encourage residents to review the call to action information by visiting it's basically a website that I'm going to be putting inside the chat. So if you would like to learn more information about that, please feel free to do so. Sorry, just let me admit a few more people. Okay, so the first portion of our panel discussion will be introductions. So I'd just like to introduce our panelists. We have Mayor Wade Mills, who's been the mayor of Shelburne since 2018. Steve Weaver, president of GSP Group and the town's planner since 2008. Stephen Burnett, the principal of S. Burnett and Associates Limited and the town's engineering firm since 2012. And Mike McLean, vice president of Fieldgate Developments, the new development that's been within the town of Shelburne since 2017. To begin the discussion, we're going to have a quick presentation by Steve Weaver. Steve, I'm just going to allow you to share your screen.
Okay. Let me know when that comes up.
Looks good here, Steve.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you, albeit virtually. I am suffering through the tail end of a bit of a cold, so it's probably good that we're meeting virtually. I apologize for the nasally sound of my voice a little bit. I'll try and get through this without coughing into the mic or anything. I did want to just, maybe to provide some background and points of interest for today's discussion, give you some highlights from the current work that is ongoing, both at the county and town levels, and how that relates to provincial requirements and directions related to planning for Shelburne's future growth. And there is a bit of a top-down model in some respects with regarding how much growth we are to plan for and how it's planned for, while at the same time there is some flexibility once you get further into the process and looking at the town's official plan and secondary planning in terms of how you arrange different land uses and dwelling types and building heights and those kinds of things. To kick things off, I will also just highlight some interesting information in terms of the past growth numbers as well as the future forecast. So you can see in kind of the left part of this growth line in the graph here, the population of Shelburne has grown steadily from 2001 census to the 2021 census that was released earlier this year and late last year. And the population has almost reached the 9,000 mark as of the 2021 census. I think it probably has, since the census was taken. You can see the rate of growth from 2011 to 2016 to 2021 was similar to that in the 2001 to 2011 range. There was a 5-year census period there where the rate of growth really became significantly faster as a result of multiple large subdivision developments occurring all at once. And you can see that on the graph here from 2011 to 2016. This is really when the Summerhill and Greenbrook Village subdivisions were developed. So quite a bit of added population in that relatively short time frame. None of us have a crystal ball, but we do know from the county's work that we are to plan for a 2051 population of approximately 15,000. And if you assume that number is reached kind of on a linear basis, the line would continue at a similar rate of growth as has been seen over the last 5 years. Of course, there may be some ups and downs along that line as growth peaks and valleys, but this is the overall growth trajectory for Shelburne as we know it currently. Just a bit more data from the census. So the 5-year growth rate was 10.7% from 2016 to 2021. That's quite a bit less, as I mentioned, than the previous 5-year growth rate from 2011 to 2016. It was approximately 40%. At that time, over that 5-year period, Shelburne was recognized as the fastest growing small town in Ontario. And things have kind of leveled off a little bit since then, albeit 10.7% is still a fairly fast growth rate. And it does align with the growth rates that we're seeing in the kind of 2001 to 2011 timeframe, as mentioned before. The number of dwellings in Shelburne has increased by about 1,000 over the last 10 years, from about 2,100 to 3,100. The density of the population has gone up by about 450 people per square kilometer. So it was less than 1,000 per square kilometer for all of Shelburne in 2011, and now is getting closer to 1,400. The boundaries of Shelburne have not changed over that time, so we are talking about the same geography. And obviously, as you add more people, your density goes up. One of the interesting facets of Shelburne's population is that, unlike many communities in Ontario who continue to see an increasing age characteristic of their population due to the baby boomer demographic, Shelburne's population has maintained a fairly low age profile and has actually decreased over the last 10 years. So it was about 37 or 38 years in 2011. And with the influx of young families and children, despite the aging in place of existing population, the average or median age in Shelburne did decrease slightly over the 10 years. Along with that, maybe somewhat expectedly, the average household size has gone up a little bit. So in 2011, it was about 2.7 persons per unit, and in 2021, it was 2.9. This one was a bit of a surprise to me, but the average or median total household income in 2020 ticked up quite a bit over 2011. It was 66,000 in 2010, according to the 2011 National Household Survey. And then according to the 2021 census, the 2020 is 99,000. So about a 50% increase in the median total household income. As we know, that has not kept pace with the rate of increase of average home prices. Back in 2010, the average home price would have been probably in the magnitude of 5 to 6 times the median total household income. And I think we're more in the 8 to 10 times range now in 2020, 2022. In terms of looking forward, one of the things that we as planners, both at the local level and at the county level, have to do is determine how much growth to plan for. And I mentioned that top-down approach that exists in Ontario, particularly in the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe or GGH area. Both Dufferin County and Shelburne are part of that area. And for all of the regions in that area, the province has developed a plan stipulating how much growth each region is required to plan for as a minimum. So for Dufferin County, that 2051 growth number is 95,000 population and 39,000 jobs. And as I say, that's a minimum. The county could have chosen to plan for more than that. However, there are certain criteria that have to be met to demonstrate that you can achieve a higher number. So once the county has taken these numbers from the growth plan, there's an exercise called the Municipal Comprehensive Review, and or MCR, and that's the process that the county's been in for the last couple of years, where they have the difficult task, like all upper tier municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, of allocating that countywide growth to the local municipalities, and the local municipalities in turn are then required to use those numbers to determine how much housing and employment and commercial and so forth to plan for. So I mentioned that the growth plan stipulates that those forecasts that we were just looking at have to be used at a minimum, and that higher forecasts could be used. So far, the county MCR has looked at the Schedule 3 forecasts. And so through the county MCR process that WSP is working on for the county, they have identified forecasts for each of the local municipalities, including Shelburne. And I've just boxed Shelburne's numbers out in red here. This census population number doesn't quite line up with where the census actually landed. As it pointed out earlier, it's about 9,000, excuse me. And we're planning for, according to these allocations, a 2051 population of 15,000. And then on the employment side, 2021 population, our estimate of jobs in Shelburne is currently about 3,100, and planning to nearly double that to 5,700 in 2051. The county then takes that information and turns it into projected number of homes that would be required to achieve those population levels. With the population growth of 5,700 over the 30-year time frame, Shelburne would need to accommodate approximately 2,075 new homes. One of the requirements of the growth plan is that the majority of the growth in the county gets allocated to municipalities that have full municipal water and wastewater services. So those are Shelburne, Orangeville, and Grand Valley. So that's why you see the majority of the countywide growth being allocated to those three municipalities, with a lesser amount to the rural municipalities. So this does get a little bit more detailed in this kind of top-down model. Not only is the county required to determine how much growth each local municipality is required to plan for the three urban municipalities of Shelburne, Orangeville, and Grand Valley, it has to estimate and demonstrate that there's a balance of outward growth in new development areas around the periphery of the community with what's called intensification or redevelopment within the existing community. And there are targets that are required to be met around that. And so for Shelburne, if there's 2,000 new dwellings required over the next 30 years, based on a 48% intensification target to achieve the countywide 40% intensification target, Shelburne would need to plan for nearly 1,000 new dwellings in its existing built up area. And that certainly becomes more challenging over time because the only place to go is up. There's limited number of vacant properties remaining in the existing built up part of the community. And many of those have been filled in over the last number of years. So this creates a bit of a to-do list item for us at the local level to determine is that possible, and what's the best way that intensification amount could be achieved. So we've previously estimated that Shelburne could accommodate a little over 500 new residential units in its built up area based on remaining intensification potential. And this set of data is telling us we actually need to plan for about double that over the next 30 years. So we have to look at taller buildings, more redevelopment opportunities, and things like secondary units. Excuse me. Gonna take a drink here. The other part of the equation is the outward growth or greenfield part of the growth equation. So this is new development area around the periphery of the community. And the target that's required to be met in that case is that you have to achieve a certain density of people and jobs per hectare of land. And that target for Shelburne currently is 41 people and jobs per hectare. And according to the growth forecast that the county has developed, in order to achieve the greenfield portion of the development forecast, nearly 60 hectares of additional land would need to be added to Shelburne's urban boundary. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. So 3 key takeaways from that information in terms of the MCR at the county level. The to-do list for Shelburne is 1, to plan for more intensification to make up the shortfall of 480 plus units over the next 30 years. To expand the urban area boundary, we need about 60 or 59 hectares of additional developable land to meet the greenfield portion of the development forecast. And in order to figure out how to service all of that growth and ensure community services such as parks and recreation facilities and so forth keep up with growth related needs, the town will need to continue with its infrastructure planning and community services master plans. Excuse me. So regarding intensification, this is what that looks like at the local level in Shelburne. So you can see this area highlighted in blue. That is the built up area of Shelburne as it was mapped by the province in 2008 or thereabouts. Some areas obviously have built out since then beyond that boundary. The Summerhill subdivision up here, parts of the Greenbrook Village subdivision over here, Cedar Hills over here. But that boundary is fixed. The province has not offered any opportunity to change this built boundary that they've mapped. So any development that occurs within that blue area accounts towards meeting that intensification target. The primary location for intensification in Shelburne is in the downtown area here. And the way that intensification has historically been achieved there and how it can be achieved in the future is through the renovation and expansion of existing buildings. You've seen some of that in the downtown area. One of the challenges with intensifying in the downtown is there's a real lack of consolidated parking or parking structures. So there's not a lot of land space to accommodate the parking required with the expanded buildings. Obviously, you want to also build on and maintain the heritage building character of the downtown while you intensify as well, and not introduce buildings that look out of place. And then one of the main constraints that we've expressed as a concern to both the county and the province over many years is that the volume of through traffic, and in particular heavy trucks through the downtown, makes it maybe more of a challenging environment to encourage and achieve intensification. And that we need to work on a bypass route, as we have been with the province and the county, to find another way to route trucks outside of the downtown. There are a few other spots where intensification is possible and is planned in the existing built up area. Over on the west side of town, south of Main Street. IK World, it's an existing industry, has planned a subdivision redevelopment of their site. That does include, account towards intensification. There are a number of infill sites throughout the blue area where there's opportunity for infill lot severances and turning a single detached dwelling into a semi-detached and those sorts of things. And then there's 2 condominium townhouse developments as well underway, which include the Shelburne Towns development along the east side of the former rail corridor at the end of 1st and 2nd Ave. And then on the north side of Main Street, east of the Besley Drain, near Simon Street, is the Ravines Edge development. And then I mentioned secondary residential units, also referred to here as additional residential units. There are some provisions in the Planning Act for things like basement apartments and laneway homes that we're working into the zoning bylaw that also contribute to achieving intensification. There are really 2 areas of land remaining for urban expansion. So this is the greenfield portion of the development picture. And they're on the west side, I think, as most people know, between the existing urban boundary here, north of Main Street and 4th Line on the west. There are already some development applications proposed for that area. And the area offers approximately 75 hectares total of land, of which about 42 hectares is developable due to some environmental constraints. And then the other smaller piece is along Victoria Street, where there is some vacant land available there, currently outside the urban boundary and being looked at to be added to the urban boundary through the MCR process. A secondary plan was done for that west area a number of years ago, and part 1 of it was implemented. So these colors show all the different land uses approved for the west area, part 1. The remaining part, or part 2, shown in the blue here and yellow, orange, and red in the north, is still to be implemented and will need some updates after the county's completed their MCR. Basically, these secondary plan level of detail is where the local municipality has the flexibility to determine how much of the land will be planned for single detached dwellings, semi-detached, townhomes, apartments, seniors' homes, commercial development, all of those things. And then just to wrap things up, to support all of that work that we will have to do following the MCR, there's been a number of master plans and servicing environmental assessments underway for some time now, and there are opportunities to participate in those processes as well. I think Steve Burnett may talk a little bit about the wastewater plant environmental assessment and design work that's being completed to ensure there's sanitary servicing capacity planned for this future growth. The well 3 drinking water supply work, and then the water and wastewater servicing master plans. That's really for the hard infrastructure for water and wastewater. On the transportation side, there has been a terms of reference developed for both a transportation master plan and highway access management plan related to Highway 89. Those processes have kind of been on hold until we get some more information from the county's transportation master plan and some further details from MTO on the highway access management plan. And then finally, there is some consultation coming up in the next couple of weeks on the Parks and Recreation Master Plan and Fiddle Park Plan. And this is where we get to look at what future needs, current and future needs, we need to think about for parks, recreation facilities, and improvements to existing parks to meet the needs of growth and ensure there's continued positive change in the future. So I know that was a lot of information. I hope there's some interesting parts to it that you can take away and share with others from the meeting today. But at this point, I'll turn it back to you, Carol, to start the panel discussion. Thank you. Oh, I think you're on mute, Carol.
Sorry about that. I do want to apologize. It appears that the chat box has been disabled. So what we are going to have to do is, if you have a question, please raise your hand, and then I will unmute you, and then you can ask your question. I do have a series of questions that I'm going to go through first. I'm going to have a series of questions that I'm going to go to first. So if you could please bear with us. Hi, can I just ask the panelists to just mute themselves while they, thank you. Okay, so the first question is for Mayor Wade Wills. With more growth expected, how important is it for the town to try to balance the types of new development? For example, a variety of housing types and more commercial and industrial.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Yeah, I think really that this question, comes down to two distinct parts. What we've seen over the last number of years in Shelburne in terms of our growth, has been predominantly on the residential side. And within that sphere, I think there's an opportunity for us going forward, and actually, more than an opportunity, but probably a necessity, to diversify the kind of housing stock that we're starting to see in town. Steve talked about the rather aggressive intensification targets that we're going to have to meet in order to meet the growth targets. That alone, I think, necessitates a different look at the kind of residential growth that we're going to be experiencing. The fact is the big single detached single family homes that we have seen predominantly in the past, it isn't going to cut it going forward. Sure there's still a place for that, but I think we have to look at a more diversified stock going forward, whether that's as Steve had said, multi residential units. I think there's a real opportunity to look at housing opportunities that are directed towards seniors, some more affordable housing, obviously. So that's on the residential side. In terms of the bigger picture question, though, I think we also have to consider, trying to balance that residential growth with other types of growth. So, commercial, industrial. As of last year, I believe the correct number was about 85%, and that represents our residential portion of our tax base. So when you look at our entire tax base as a town, about 85% of that is made up from residential homes. And I personally, and I think the rest of the current council agrees with me on this, we would like to see that number come down, so that the tax burden isn't borne so heavily on the residential homeowner taxpayer. I was in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago for a conference, and one of the speakers was from MPAC, and he was going through a number of slides, but the one that really caught my eye was he sort of gave a breakdown of the provincial average in terms of an average municipality's tax base, and the provincial average on the residential side is about 75%. And as I said, we're closer to 85%. So it's not as though we're tremendously out of whack, but I would like to see that 85% brought down, so that the tax burden could be spread a little bit more evenly amongst commercial and industrial landowners. So I think there really are two parts to that question, and going forward, I think there's a responsibility on the part of the town to try to accomplish both, more balance in terms of the residential growth that we're seeing, and more generally, just a rebalancing of the total growth that we're seeing from mainly residential to a broader mix of residential, commercial, and industrial.
Thank you. The next question is for Steve Burnett. Do we have sufficient infrastructure currently to meet the next 20 to 30 years of growth and demand?
That is a bit of a difficult question to answer in full because it is spread over the infrastructure across the town of Shelburne. Usually we kind of put infrastructure into three pots, being sort of, do you have sufficient water supply? Is there sufficient water storage for emergencies and fire protection? And then is there sufficient sewage capacity for the town? So the first answer is from a water supply. There is currently sufficient water supply to project out approximately 15 years. So as Steve Weaver had indicated, there has been studies ongoing for a few years now, projecting forward that needed infrastructure to match sort of the growth that is somewhat mandated by the province onto the town and townships. So from a water supply perspective, there's a little bit of work to do, but is sufficient. Water storage, most folks will see that there's a new water tower on the south end of town, and that was forward thinking planning and capital investment by the town to satisfy that water storage and fire protection piece. So that actually will provide 25 years of future sort of capacity from an infrastructure perspective for water storage. The last component being sewage treatment does not currently have capacity and will require and has been under study, as again Steve Weaver had indicated, and will require a capital project to ensure that there is sufficient sewage treatment and capacity moving forward for the next 20 to 25 years.
Thank you. The next question is for Mike McLean. What's happening in the home construction space that residents and purchasers might be interested in?
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, so there's a few things, and I think just what everybody's generally familiar that there's not only a COVID effect, but there's a seeming hangover to the pandemic. We've had a lot of issues across, sort of the trade supply, which includes labor, materials. We've kind of gotten through a few of them. There were some plastic supply issues. More historically, there was earlier this year a concrete supply issue, which has dragged things down and continues to sort of pass through a difficult period where we weren't able to keep things moving ahead on pace. And there continues to be a metals supply issue, which doesn't allow us to put cladding or having to find alternate materials to clad buildings, such as steel panels. Interesting, it goes far beyond into the full construction space. The Foodland Plaza, we had to re-engineer the Foodland building with different trusses and beams, as well as we're dealing with issues in other places where we can't get aluminum on houses to close fire breaks, and it's dragging down the next house. So there continues to be a bit of a hangover there from a lot of different facets to keep construction moving, not the least of which is a labor issue as well. So anyways, hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Mike. And the next question is for Steve Weaver. How do municipalities determine how much land is required for future growth? And the following question, and the follow-up question if needed. Sorry, Steve. How is it determined which land is best for accommodating growth and development?
Yeah, thanks, Carol. So those forecasts and growth numbers that come from the provincial growth plan and then work their way through the county official plan are what is required to be used by the town to determine how much land it needs to accommodate growth. So town doesn't have ultimate flexibility on how much growth it can plan for. It's really two confining things. One is the growth plan itself and how much growth it allocates to the county, and then from the county to the town. And then once we have those numbers, as I mentioned in the presentation, you have to then make sure you're meeting the intensification and density targets. So I didn't cover this in the presentation, but the whole rationale and basis for this regional growth approach and the growth plan itself is not only about ensuring a good mix of housing types and balance of commercial, residential, industrial, complete community development, all those good planning objectives. It really is an additional step that's been taken by the province since 2006 for that specific area, because prior to that, each municipality was kind of doing its own thing, and it was that was resulting in a lot of urban sprawl, or at least the perception provincially was that if we allow each community to plan almost in a unlimited way and add too much land, we lose too much farmland. So this is very much about containing growth to places that can accommodate it in a very compact way, and making sure that the land that is chosen for that growth, so the second part of the question, is not land that, if possible, is otherwise usable for agriculture. So the selection of the land that can be allocated and designated for growth, there's some criteria that have to be addressed, including are there land that isn't used for agriculture or isn't prime agricultural land? And if so, go to that land first. Secondly, if there's land that's not as good for agriculture, or has been fragmented and taken out of production, go to that land next. The last resort is taking good farmland out of agricultural production, and that's to be avoided at all costs. And so for Shelburne, there isn't as much of that consideration because Shelburne's municipal boundary is fairly small, and there isn't a lot of land outside the urban boundary. There's only those two places on the west side, north of Main Street out to Fourth Line, and then on the west side of Victoria Street. So that narrows the options, obviously. Those are the only two places remaining. But in other communities that have, say like Grand Valley, more land around all sides of the community, and within their own municipality, they don't have to do a municipal boundary adjustment. They have to be careful about which land is chosen because it has to fulfill those criteria around prime agricultural land protection.
Thank you, Steve. We do have a question from one of our guests. It's Randy. Randy, I'm going to unmute you. Do you mind if your video is on as well?
Yeah, that's fine. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
So I know you're talking about the sewage treatment plant. One of the things that I keep hearing is that our treatment plant's at capacity and can't handle anything past phase one of the new development happening over by Fieldgate. How true is that?
I can maybe answer that one, Carol.
Yeah, thank you.
So the existing treatment plant is nearing capacity. It is not true that it can only handle phase one of the new development. There have several portions of that development that have been approved. There is one piece that has not been approved due to sewage capacity, and that is something that's monitored regularly and has been referred to as a D5 calculation, but not that anyone really wants to know what that is, but it is something that is monitored both by the town and also by the province for the capacity of the facilities within the town.
If I could, Carol, just for the sake of clarity, for Randy or for anybody else sort of watching, the way that the development process works is, we don't sort of, go ahead and approve certain phases within a development and then figure out the allocation later. I mean, that's sort of a calculation that's done up front. So before a particular phase of a development is approved, there are already allocation reserves set aside for that. So that it doesn't become a guessing game. It doesn't become, sort of a game where you're trying to run out the clock. At the end of the day, figuring out those allocation numbers after the fact. All of that stuff is set aside. The assurances are made, at the front end before those development approvals are granted. And Steve, I'm just wondering if you could maybe just give a quick update as to kind of where we are in terms of the sewage plant upgrade process. I've fielded a lot of questions over the last little while in particular, and I have a sense that most of the community doesn't really have a good clear idea as to where we are in the process of completing those upgrades.
You bet. So just to add to the mayor's point, there has been a lot of planning associated with this on the infrastructure side. So a full environmental assessment, as Steve Weaver indicated earlier, was commenced close to 6 years ago. So back in 2016, planning ahead for this situation. And the simulated capacity study has been completed and approved by the province to increase the size of the existing and upgrade the existing sewage treatment plant to handle the next 20 years of population and flows to it. That EA actually wrapped up as a public information center presented earlier this year in spring. With the recommendations moving forward to upgrade the existing facility. Council has also approved moving forward with the detailed design of those upgrades, and that work has commenced with some of the initial survey work and field investigation moving ahead, with the goal of ultimately completing the design for the sewage treatment plant upgrades. And ultimately, then moving forward with that expansion in the next 2 to 3 years. One item to note with that, as well as I know, and I'll bring it up because I hear it as well throughout these studies and throughout this investigation. Odor issues have been brought forward by some residents, and it was determined through these studies that there were some of the existing processes within the existing facility that were just undersized, would not have had the sufficient capacity even for the current sort of population. And specifically, these are the digesters and some of the things that deal with the solids side of sewage treatment. Just so everyone is aware, those upgrades are being incorporated with this design, and the goal is to ensure that all of those sort of smaller processes and pieces that may have led to some of the odor issues are being addressed during this detailed design and this upgrade. So not that it'll eliminate all odors. It is a sewage treatment plant, but the goal is so that it is not nearly as difficult as it has been in the summer months for residents around that area. So that is definitely part of the upgrade work that has been approved by council and is moving forward in the design stage at this point. So.
Is it possible I can ask just a couple other questions?
Yes. Are they all related to the sewage treatment plant, or are they?
One is, I just was curious about how long it would take to actually upgrade the plant once the designs are done. So you're saying 2 to 3 years. How long would you guys estimate that it would take to do that, to actually upgrade the facility?
So at this point, it has been estimated that construction is approximately a 2-year process. Design is approximately a year to a year and a half process, which, as I said, is already underway. So that's where the estimate of the 2 to 3 years is provided. To be fair, there is a financial a piece associated with this. So that's based on assumptions that we're just talking about the work of design and the work of construction. There obviously has to be a financial business plan that goes along with that to ensure that that could move under that timeline.
That they were saying what it's over 60 million or 60 million plus to redo it.
At this point, the estimates are in the 35 to I think 36 million range is the current estimates. Now, as others had said, it's a COVID hangover and pricing, but that is the current estimate for the facility.
I appreciate it.
Okay, so I think we should move on to some other questions, if that's okay with the panelists. Okay, this question is for Mike McLean. How are interest rates affecting the housing supply?
It's maybe twofold. So interest rates obviously have an effect on purchasers. It does have an impact on builders and developers as well who use leveraged capital. So I think you're starting to see a few slowdown in the more intense forms of development, which require milestones to be used with respect to pre-sales or the like in, let's say, a condo building or condo complexes. It is also providing a bit of a positive in my mind. Aside from the price adjustments, because affordability issues are being addressed, where prices seem to be coming down, at least modestly, if not a little bit more, to deal with people's ability to pay their bills every month. So a lot of families have obviously fixed opportunities or relatively fixed points, so they have to afford both. So the interest rates are going up, and I don't think that's news to anybody. But where I think it's being positive is we've talked about, a housing bubble through a pandemic and perhaps this hangover. So we have seen absolutely a slowdown in sales velocities as people maybe sit on the sidelines and try to see what's happening. But what's happening in a positive sense is that the homes that were sold and the construction that was put into underway, to deal with previous sales, has got a bit of an opportunity to catch up. So in that regard, I think it's a bit of a positive. We're going to obviously, nobody's got the crystal ball to see what the other side looks like, but we're pretty optimistic that, growth in the province of Ontario and even in the country is still quite robust. Policies are in place to continue that. And I think what I've heard from economists that are in the news and doing speaker series and the like is that we're in a fairly short pause here until things stabilize and normalize, and probably be right back at it. So hopefully that answers the question, Karen.
Thank you. Okay, this question is for Mayor Wade Mills. From a municipal service delivery perspective, what additional pressures come from more growth?
Yeah, I mean, from the time I sort of got involved in municipal politics in Shelburne, I've said that the growth that we're experiencing brings both opportunities and challenges. I think the opportunities are evident. Some of the challenges we've talked about here already this morning, but I think when you kind of look at it conceptually, there's kind of three different categories where as a municipality we start to experience added pressure as a response to the growth. The first category is in the area of kind of the hard infrastructure services, and that's what Steve's been talking about. So, you know, water supply, water storage, wastewater, road, sidewalks, the transportation master plan that Steve Weaver spoke about. You know, all of those things obviously are critically important in order just to provide the core fundamental services that a growing population needs. And those are, you know, those are being looked after. I mean, we're well underway in terms of planning for those, as Steve Burnett said, you know, on the water supply and the water storage side of things, we're well positioned to be prepared, you know, into the future. The sewage treatment side, you know, our project is very much underway and will be completed within that 2 to 3 year time frame. That'll then provide us that 20 to 25 year assurance that we need. The transportation side, I'll touch on this just for a moment because it's sort of a hot button issue. As Steve Weaver had mentioned, we are sort of at the beginning stages of doing a local transportation master plan. The larger regional approach, though, is much further along at the county of Dufferin, and one of the things that I think, you know, is good news for the town of Shelburne is that a bypass for Shelburne has been identified within kind of that initial draft county plan as a fairly high priority. And I had a number of conversations over the course of the last 3.5, 4 years with provincial officials about the need for a bypass around our downtown core. And one of the messages I kept receiving is that, you know, this really has to be pitched as more of a regional transportation issue as opposed to just a local, you know, Shelburne only issue. So that's the strategic approach we've taken. And when that county transportation master plan is done and endorsed by county council, I think that gives us a fair bit of added credibility when we go back to the province and say, okay, look at, you know, this has been identified now as a regional transportation issue of significant importance, and hopefully we can get the provincial buy-in that we need to at least start planning that process. So as I said, category 1 is the hard services. The second thing that we start to experience pressure with respect to is the soft services, and I kind of broadly characterize those as, you know, the parks and recreation stuff, the arts and culture stuff, and again, we're doing significant work on that front. We have the Parks and Rec master plan, the Fiddle Park plan. Carol, you've been doing significant work on the arts and culture side with Grace Tippling Hall. But again, a growing population demands more soft services. You know, it just stands to reason that, you know, the existing parks and rec and arts and culture infrastructure that serviced a community of 6,000 isn't going to suffice for a community of 9 or 10,000 down the road, 15,000. So we have to start giving some progressive forethought to those sorts of things. The final kind of category where I start to see pressures resulting from growth is, you know, what I at least personally call sort of the social infrastructure side. And this is a more difficult one to pin down. But what I'm talking about when I mention social infrastructure is, you know, finding ways to respond to a changing population. So not only are we growing, but the demographics of our population are changing. We're becoming younger. We're becoming more diversified. So what does that mean in terms of our service delivery model? You know, we've done some significant work over this term, some important work, I think, in the diversity, equity, and inclusion side of things, and that work obviously is ongoing. You know, and it's one of those things that I think, you know, becomes easy to kind of shove to the back burner. You know, because it's not quite as you know, evident perhaps as the hard infrastructures of the parks and rec stuff. It's not tangible. It's not something that you can see being built. but that social infrastructure, I think is, in many ways just as important for a growing community as the others. And that's something that, this council has worked towards, and certainly something that the next council is going to have to turn their minds to. So hopefully that kind of addresses the question.
Thank you, Mayor Mills. We have a question from a participant. Faz, I'm just going to unmute you.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, just a quick question. Just maybe this is more directed towards Mike. I'm just curious how many homes are actually going into the new field gate development, and when are they approximately finished?
Sure. So I don't have the exact number on, partly because we've got, I guess, a couple comments that I'll make coming up, but we've got some future blocks that Steve Burnett alluded to that might host some additional development, but in the order of 300 homes are in our development. May go, above that, depending on what we're looking for and what the town is willing to approve on some of the peripheral lands within our development. Right now, we're looking at occupancy starting in December. And some of the hangover effects that I mentioned before is kind of giving me a bit of hesitation to answer the question firmly, but hopefully by the end of 2023, the majority of those roughly 300 homes that are already sold will be completed. But we're going to have to see how things shake out in terms of the labor and supply. One of the things, if anybody's around, and we've got a lot of open homes, we're waiting for foundation formwork to show up. So that's been one of our constraining factors, just getting out of the gate.
Thank you. Well, we're almost near the end. It's 8:29. If there's anyone who has any other questions, if you could send me an email at edc@shelburne.ca, I will certainly try to get your question answered. But I believe right now we're just going to end the session. I want to thank everybody for participating in today's workshop. And I really do appreciate all the input that has been provided by our panelists and also by our participants. Just to let you know that this is part of a 4-part series. So if you are interested in attending any of the other series, please do so. You can check out what's available at shelburne.ca. Okay, so I'd like everyone to have a good morning. It's been an early, long day so far, and it's only just started. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night, or have a good morning.
Thanks for having me, Carol. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.